Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Holland. I'm the Chief Executive of the British Chilean Chamber of Commerce, and it's a great pleasure to be here with you this afternoon, although it is getting late on a Friday afternoon. So I'm delighted to see that we have more than 100 people already joining us for this session this afternoon. So that's absolutely wonderful to have so many people. I know some of you have just joined, so I just wanted to reiterate a couple of the rules of the session before I introduce our panelists. The main thing is to tell you that your cameras and your microphones will be blocked for about the first 45 minutes. And I will go through a round of questions with our panelists. During that time, if you think of any comments or questions that you would like to make, please address them to me in the chat room, and I will be monitoring that so that when we open up the floor to discussion, I can see your questions and we can get you involved with the conversation. This is meant to be a conversation. So, our first panelist today is Mauricio Veliz. Mauricio es el Director Escuela de Pedagogías en Inglés de la Universidad de Talca. Also, we have with us Gonzalo Eyzaguirre, who is el Director de Ciclo Menor en el Instituto de Humanidades, Alfredo Silva, Santiago, de Concepción. Y también tenemos Annjeanette Martin, who is the Directora de Pedagogía Básica Bilingüe de la Universidad de los Andes, here in Santiago. Welcome, panelistas, and thank you very much for sharing your time with us this afternoon. Mauricio, if I can start with you. Can you tell us what lessons can be learned from successful bilingual education or CBLT schemes at an international level, please?
Okay, thank you very much, Greg, and thank you all for being here. I think it requires a lot of motivation on everybody's part to gather together online. And you've already been sitting maybe in front of the screen for quite some time now. And so I think it's great that we are now discussing bilingualism, second language education. And the question, of course, is what lessons can be learned from successful international experiences? Well, bilingualism, as we all know, can be placed on a continuum. What is being bilingual, or what is bilingualism? In the 1930s, there was a very conservative school of thought according to which being bilingual meant being able to master two linguistic codes at native speaker level. And that, of course, underwent a transitional stage to a more lax, a more loose understanding of what being bilingual entailed, up until today, where you've got people that would argue that being bilingual is simply to be able to have some understanding, being able to use, perhaps with differentiated levels of proficiency, two language systems. So who has done a good job then? I think it is definitely a very good question, and not an easy answer can be offered straight away, because languages and language learning, language teaching at national level does touch upon political issues. So language policies often respond to politics and issues of power. What languages are we going to teach in our country? Think about what happened in Chile towards the 1990s, when a major decision had to be made as to which foreign language was going to be taught. It was then decided that only one foreign language was going to be taught as part of the national curriculum. And a certain degree of freedom, quote unquote, was given to schools to opt for a foreign language. Of course, that decision was made in favor of English. Why? Well, because most countries in the West have opted, and in the East increasingly, in the East have opted for English as the language to be taught. So I think that the first idea that I would like to share is that based on the geopolitical issues that are embedded in bilingual education at national levels, first, it would be so good to have politicians whose policies are informed by research. And sometimes language policies are simply respond to short-term political gains. That's the first thing that I want to, the first point that I would like to make. Language policies and the divorce that you can sometimes find between language policies on the one hand and how languages and how foreign or second additional languages are learned and taught. Second, I think there are a number of countries and there are international experiences that are now favoring, rather than bilingualism, trilingualism, plurilingualism, multilingualism. I can think of, for example, Luxembourg. Luxembourg is a country where trilingualism has been favored over the past years, over the past maybe 2 or 3 decades, where German, for example, French, and Luxembourgish, I might get the name of the language wrong, of course, but I think it's called Luxembourgish, are equally treated. They're treated politically in the same fashion. They're given the same importance. And following Robert Philipson has argued that the future of the 21st century is not necessarily, is definitely not monolingualism. And it's not bilingualism either, but probably and most likely multilingualism. So there should be greater recognition for minority languages and heritage language. Skudnup Kangas, who I understand happens to be Philipson's wife, Skudnup Kangas coined the term linguicism and has treated English, for example, as a killer language. Maybe we didn't know, but one language disappears every week. Every week. And it's been estimated that out of the 7,000 languages that there are now across the world, in the next few years, where that number is going to come down to maybe some 3,000 or 4,000. What I am saying then is that stronger policies and more robust policies should favor multilingualism. Luxembourg is a very good example. Sweden, I think, is a very good example. Early childhood bilingual programs have been around in Sweden for quite a few decades now. They had huge waves of migrants back in the 70s. It was of course not an unknown phenomenon for the Swedish government. They had previously lots of migrants in the 50s and 60s, but of course there were huge waves of migrants back in the 70s, and they started thinking about how they were going to treat migrants' home languages. Recognition. They signed a charter. They also understood that, of course, if they wanted to go, international, they were not going to be able to do so if they spoke Swedish. Of course, they incorporated English very, very firmly into their curriculum, and not only in their curriculum, but I think that there is another lesson that has to be learned. Maybe societal consensus that other languages need to be incorporated into the curriculum. The Council of Europe in the 1990s, of course, recognizing the rich diversity, linguistic diversity that you can find in Europe, does accommodate plurilingualism, multilingualism. So those are some of the lessons that we've got to learn. I mean, recognition for minority languages as well. And I think maybe to wrap this up, I don't know whether I've got any other, any a couple of minutes, but in this area of knowledge, there are at least two major approaches. The so-called additive approach and the so-called subtractive approach. So are we going to add languages to already existing languages in our population, or are we going to think of other languages to be learned and taught at the expense of an ever decreasing proficiency in people's mother tongue? And I think,
could I stop you there? Could I stop you there? I think that's a really interesting point, and I'm sure we'll come back to that, the growth of new languages and how long our existing languages will actually survive in the society of our youth. But perhaps, thank you for that. We'll come back to that point, I think, a little later.
thank you.
Gonzalo, maybe I could move on and ask you a question now. What type of preparation should teachers who take classes in bilingual schools have? What type of preparation would they have to prepare them best for teaching bilingual schools?
All right, Greg, thanks. Well, first of all, I need to say thanks to the organizers of this. I never expected this conference being so huge, and with the experts I have here next to me, sitting next to me, because we are in a virtual context, right? But I think, well, I need to say that when I was thinking about making a question, I thought of this, and then I realized that I had two experts on this, such as people in charge of the career programs in universities. We have Mauricio here and Annjeanette from different universities, and they had the task of preparing teachers, right? So it's, I need to say that. And second, I will talk a bit about my professional background, so you can understand the context in which I'm going to place you in order to answer this question. Yeah. As a head of area working in a bilingual school, which is meant to be a bilingual school, first we need to define what's a bilingual school. Yeah, as Mauricio said, it's not only the acquisition of a second language. Yeah, it's also being immersed in the culture of another, completely from another country, right? And here I'm not talking about English-speaking countries only. Yeah, we need to refer to every other culture that we could be immersed to. I think English is only the mean to get to other cultures, because of arts, because of entertainment, because of historical background, etc. But when we speak of another language, of learning another language or becoming bilingual, we need to understand that first, that we are going to achieve a background from other countries. Second is that my task in a school as a head of area is to provide students with a safe environment to learn, right? And that's not only to provide equal opportunities to learn English in my case, but also to provide, as I said before, a violence-free environment, a non-aggression environment, a tolerant and respectful environment. Yeah, and sometimes that can be a tough work. Why? Because we deal with a number of families that come from different backgrounds, right? They have different family lives, etc. So in order to link all those characteristics and think of the profile of a student that we want to develop, yeah, we need to first, as I said, provide them with a safe environment. So one of the characteristics that we in schools need for teachers to be prepared to face these issues, in real life situations, is that teachers can receive a training in, first of all, in innovation, second, in inclusion, and third, in the language. As a requirement in our school, well, students follow a bilingual program until year 6, right? And that means that they learn English in a full immersion program until year 6, and then at the end of the year 6, they take one of the Cambridge examinations, right? They are focused on acquiring the A2 level. So another quality that teachers need to have in our case, in the school I work at, is that teachers can achieve a B2 or C1 level at when they are teaching in these years. And third, and this is a quite complex characteristic to define, because from the experience I have gathered working in different bilingual environments, locally and abroad, sometimes when we have to select teachers to teach at school, we have a dilemma whenever the teacher is an English teacher willing to learn other subjects, in order to teach them in primary years, or if we have a primary teacher, who knows English, who can speak English fluently, but with no certification at all. And that's a fact, right? Because not all the programs, at least in Concepción or in Talcahuano or nearby, offer this certification in English in the levels we need for a bilingual school. That's why bilingual schools, mostly in the area, choose teachers, English teachers, in order to teach other languages. And they start from the very beginning, they start being helpers in the classroom. And then if they have enough training, if they can get a certification, if they learn the programs, because most of the bilingual schools here are from the IB program in the area. The school I work at is not an IB school, from the International Baccalaureate. We follow the national program, the national curriculum, which is not possible to adapt it in order to create a bilingual student, right? Because in the English syllabus, the main goal is understanding, and it's based on the receptive skills, right? So when we have to make this teacher selection, we need to check on their background, on their experience, and mostly the personal experience, because as I said before, universities lack of this preparation. So what universities should be both focusing on for the preparation of teachers is that they should have first training in inclusive ways of evaluation, in cultural backgrounds of different societies, and in English certification. When you blend those three characteristics is when you can, is when you, as a head of area, can say that a teacher is fully prepared to teach in a bilingual school.
Thank you, Gonzalo. I think we can just move on there. We'll come back to that. Can I just check one point of my understanding with you? I think you said because of the lack of English teachers with certification, you end up taking on teachers to teach English who don't have certification. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And the other subjects that those teachers teach, do they continue to teach them as well, or do they move over to English? Trying to understand exactly that point.
Yeah, well, English teachers tend to teach other subjects, so they need to train. It's mostly self-training, what we do. And then they can teach these other subjects like maths, like social studies, or like natural sciences, right?
Okay. And they teach those other subjects in English?
In English, yes.
Okay,
And that's
understand.
how you, yeah.
Okay, okay, perfect, thank you. We'll come back shortly. Annjeanette, what are the benefits and challenges of implementing a bilingual program at the primary level?
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to be on this panel. It's an honor and a pleasure to participate. And I'd like to say a special hello to some of my current and former students who are here today, and also some of the other teachers and educators that I've worked with and whose names I see in the list. So hi to all of you. And a special thanks to all of you for connecting to the seminar on this cold Friday afternoon. All right, so the question in terms of benefits and challenges of implementing a bilingual program at the primary level. And first I'd like to talk about some of the benefits. And first, there's a widespread belief, it's a myth in many ways, that younger is better. And so that maybe the biggest benefit to a bilingual program at the primary level is just starting early. And however, there's a lot of research that refutes the belief that children learn better and faster. So we can't blindly consider that age is the most important and ignore some of the other conditions of language learning that are important. So even when starting early at the primary level, or we could say especially when starting early at the primary level, we have to assure that the optimal language learning conditions are met. And in this sense, bilingual schools, there is a benefit to starting a bilingual program at the primary level because it provides this instruction that meets these optimal conditions. So in terms of the optimal conditions, one of the most important in language learning, which has also been mentioned earlier today with Antonella Sorace, for example, is the amount of exposure, right? So if you compare a child learning his or her first language, by the time that child is 6, he or she would have accumulated about 17,000 hours of listening to the language and several thousands of hours speaking, right? So it's very difficult in sort of a traditional system where you only have 3 hours of English a week to replicate these kinds of conditions. So in that sense, the benefit of starting with a bilingual program at the primary level is you can provide many more hours of exposure to students, right? So exposure through listening and reading. And this is particularly true for young children because they learn implicitly, right? Which was also mentioned earlier today. So one of the biggest benefits of an immersion program at the primary level is that it allows for more hours of the day to be taught in English. And this increased exposure over time is one of the biggest benefits for language learning. You have more hours over more years, right? So now, not just the quantity of exposure is important, but also what we call the quality of exposure. And here, I'm not referring to grammatically correct speech. It's not quality in that sense, but I'll come back to language proficiency in a moment. So here, quality refers to the types of language that a language learner is exposed to. So if you think of the traditional English class where you have 3 hours a week, students are really only exposed to certain types of language, short dialogues, questions and answers, maybe short texts. The vocabulary is somewhat limited, etc. And this is often, it's often sort of repeated every year. Students often complain in traditional systems that they see the same, they studied the verb to be every year. So in a primary immersion program, a bilingual school, the child should or would encounter, if it's done well, lots of different types of speech over time. Descriptions, argumentation, persuasion, scientific language, historical jargon, narratives, different types of literature, fantasy, science fiction, etc. So, and that's in addition to classroom language, school language, which would also likely be in English. So English is not only limited to sort of the discourse of the English class, but you also get the variety and sense of other types of English. And this is true. Antonella also talked about variety of speakers, and this would be more possible in sort of a bilingual context as well. You would have the sort of more variety of speakers. Now, another benefit is sort of related to the openness of young learners in comparison to older learners. So school is new to young children, and they often approach, generally speaking, right? Not every child is the same, but they often approach many tasks with enthusiasm that teenagers often lose. So English can quickly come to feel like it's a natural part of schooling from a young age. They're less likely to question the relevance or how useful is this going to be when I'm older, etc. So in that sense, it can also be seen as a benefit to begin bilingual instruction at the primary level. Now, one of the challenges, which is what Gonzalo discussed, is finding appropriate teachers. So more and more schools are opting for a bilingual or an immersion model, and they're faced with this complicated scenario, which Gonzalo mentioned. So the schools can either hire the primary teacher, who may or may not have, they have sort of different levels of English, but they have the content area preparation. Or they can hire the English teacher, who has the level of English that you would want, but they have no preparation in content area methodologies, right? So neither of those scenarios is ideal, but that's sort of what teachers or what schools are faced with, making that choice. Now, so that's one of the biggest challenges is finding teachers. So there historically have been programs in Chile, the Pedagogía Básica with mención in Inglés. There are a few of those programs now, so there are some current programs who are preparing, mine, for example, that's preparing teachers for these contexts. Yeah. Now, a second challenge, which is maybe a little more complex, is moving a bilingual program beyond simply providing English medium instruction, right? So many bilingual schools end up teaching, they sort of take what they would do in Spanish, but they just teach it in English. So it's almost like a translation in a way. So one of the things that's really important for bilingual schools is to realize that we're teaching English language learners. These are students who are learning English as a second language in a foreign language context. Outside of the school, they don't have much contact with English. So inside of the school, they need as much exposure as possible, but they also need scaffolding. And there were some examples of this in Simon Lin's presentation earlier, where he showed a few examples, right, of scaffolding. So how can you work with vocabulary? How can you provide structures that the students can use to talk about some of the academic content? So moving sort of from an English medium instruction towards more of a content language integrated learning model is also a challenge. And then I would say the final challenge that I'd like to talk about is one of the things that we see in the research on primary bilingual education programs is that once, and Gonzalo mentioned, in his school and many bilingual schools here in Chile, the bilingual model ends at about 6th grade. So the student goes from having many hours in English, most of the content areas in English, and they move sort of towards a more traditional English as a foreign language type of instruction in high school. And there's often a loss of motivation when they move to the high school level. The teaching often turns more towards more grammar-based, which is not as what's the word? Is not as attractive to students. And so this is also a challenge. What happens after the bilingual primary instruction as English instruction moves towards sort of the high school level. So I think those are maybe the main sort of benefits and challenges that I see.
Okay, thank you, Annjeanette. Thank you. That's very comprehensive. Do you know we currently have 163 people online listening to this conference this afternoon, which is fantastic. So I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning, and it's great to have everybody here. I know it's late on a Friday afternoon, but I'm so pleased that we have so many people joining in. The surprising thing, though, is actually to date, to this moment, I don't have a single question in the chat room. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is your chance. I have lots of questions for the panelists, but I'd really like to ask them some of your questions. So please, get busy, get on the chat line, and please ask some questions. While we're waiting for those to come in, Mauricio, perhaps I could ask you, what makes a good teacher in bilingual education?
Well, that's a big question. If being a teacher is such a challenging thing in its own right. So now being a good, say, good English language teacher or second language teacher in a bilingual education system is probably 2 or 3 times as hard. I will just mention a few things that come to mind. I think a good teacher in a bilingual context is someone who, I think it's already been mentioned in passing, but someone who knows how languages are learned. If you don't know how languages are learned, how on earth are you going to be, wanting to be teaching another language? And that's important. I think that teachers need to be aware of the fact that a lot of declarative knowledge is not enough. And there are some teachers who are particularly fond of teaching the forms of language and the structure of language, but very little room is made for procedural knowledge to take place. In other words, I don't know how many of you had a hard time learning how to drive, but I think with most of us, or learning how to ride a bike. You may know all the rules. You may know that you shouldn't be stepping on the clutch while driving. You know that, but you do it. You still do it, and so it's not enough to know the language. Okay, knowing, speaking, and using, and being proficient in this additional language is already a challenge. Okay, let's make it even more challenging because this individual, this teacher, needs to know how those languages are learned in our context, in contexts like Chile, as Annjeanette was saying earlier. Students leave those schools and have very little real contact with that language. Other than maybe when they go online and play video games with their friends, maybe a couple of isolated words during the commercial breaks on television. And other than that, it's going to be very, very limited. So teachers need to be yes.
I'm getting some questions there. I'm going to stop you there, Mauricio, because I'm getting some questions in
Beautiful.
from our audience. So thank you for that. there's a question here for Annjeanette. It's quite a long question. So how is the syllabus of the primary bilingual teaching program in your university assembled?
Okay. Maybe I'll address this briefly, because I don't want it to turn into a sort of publicity for the program. But and maybe I'll connect this with what Mauricio Veliz was talking about, sort of what does a good bilingual primary teacher look like? What do they know? And so obviously there's a formation in terms of knowledge of English. So how does English work? How are words formed? So dealing with English proficiency, but also sort of this metalinguistic knowledge about language, right? There's also sort of formation or preparation in terms of learning about how languages are learned. So connecting again to what Mauricio was saying. So a teacher who is working with language learning in general, in whatever context, needs to know how languages are learned. What are the patterns of development? What kinds of errors students make, and what you do with those errors. So there's that sort of formation. And obviously, since they're primary teachers, they need training in the content areas. So, and the important thing here, I think, is many programs have, they have the English part, which is separate from the content area part. But and here, what you end up with is teachers who know how to teach math, but they kind of know how to teach math in Spanish, and they get into the English math class and they realize they don't know how to say par and impar, right? Odd and even. So so you need sort of content area vocabulary along with the content area methodologies, and how to connect those with English teaching. Okay. Obviously, there are other sort of pedagogical knowledge you could again, as Gonzalo was saying earlier, the importance of knowing how to deal with diversity, differentiation, dealing with special needs students, and understanding of the curriculum, how to evaluate students in all of the content areas. And then you also need sort of general pedagogical skills. So classroom management, dealing with discussions, having discussions in class, asking the right types of questions. What do you do with the data that you are collecting from class? What does it mean about student learning? So those are sort of, widely speaking, what the program looks like, or what it includes. But almost a lot of it is taught in English because you need that content area language in English.
Okay, thank you. That resonates a bit as well with what Mauricio was saying about needing to understand how the language is structured and put together. So I think there's some great consistency there in your answers. That was a question from Paula Bermudez. And thank you, Paula, for your question. I have a question here from Veronica Reyes, which says, what strategies would you recommend to start a bilingual program at a small primary public school? Maybe Gonzalo, you could pick this one up.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes, what strategies would you recommend to start a bilingual program at a small countryside public school?
Oh, that's a tough one. Thank you. But yeah, well, I think I slightly mentioned the difficulties of having a bilingual environment within the national curriculum, right, in which we are teaching at the school. So when we think of strategies, or I would say characteristics, is that what you really want to focus your school on. Why? Because there was a model in which I think most of us learned English, which was supposedly that one day we all go abroad to an English-speaking countries.
El grupo y también tenemos experiencia en relatorías presentes.
Por favor, apaga su micrófono. Carry on, Gonzalo.
That's all right. Yeah, it's all right. In which we were all exposed to maybe some landscapes from the States or from the UK. So one of the goals of our teachers, by the way, I don't want to, I don't want to sound mean in this answer, but I need to to set a context in which we can all understand, because we have, I think most of us have a similar preparation. Yeah, when we learn English at the beginning, when we were in primary school or secondary school. So one of the goals in the past when we were learning English was that one day we would be able to go abroad, to go to States or the United Kingdom or to Australia, which were the only 3 countries apparently that existed at that time. Yeah. But nowadays, we need to think of first of the profile of the student that we want to develop. Yeah. And when we think of that, we connect that to bilingualism, is not only that one day we would be able to go abroad, but it's also that one day someone will come to this small area in which the small rural area to visit it, right? Because with people from Brazil, from Argentina, and from Chile too, and from different areas. So the strategy is first to set a profile, yeah, of the student, of the bilingual student you want to achieve. Second is to immerse the student into the cultural aspects of this other language or area in which you want to form them. Third is, and it's kind of complex because it has to do with the when a school hires teachers, right? Because as Annjeanette said, we might have wonderful math teachers, but who cannot teach English in a proper way, or the level of English is not appropriate for the level you're teaching. So the selection of teachers should be very, how can I say this? Sorry, it just came out of my mind, the term. When you hire a teacher in a school, you have to be very careful about the process you follow, because it has to, I think the teacher must have the characteristics that I previously mentioned, yeah, according to the way in which the teacher can evaluate innovative ways, and also in inclusive ways of teaching, along with the level of English. Yeah, in this context, we're speaking about a bilingual school concerning to English, right? But when you can join all these characteristics, then you set your project, your school project, and then you define a profile for the student. And since then, you have to create some expectations for the students in order to be able to understand the term of bilingualism that you want to achieve. Because the reality in Chile is that not many students from rural areas have the opportunity to travel abroad. But what you want to make sure that is that the students, that they belong to a global community, right? And they whatever they do locally will have an impact in a global society. So when the question refers to what strategies you need to follow in order to create or to install a bilingual program in one of these schools, is that you need to generate the expectations from the student at the level of in which they can get motivated, right? Otherwise, you will have this old-fashioned model of teaching English in which we think that we can we all be able to travel abroad, but which is not real actually. The thing is that other people, or we might get connected to other people around the world, and other people do the same towards us.
Can I finish you there, Gonzalo? Thank you. That was a very comprehensive answer. And I think it's very interesting right now, the way that we're all talking. 160 people are connecting, as you said, from Brazil, from Argentina, from Chile. This is a very new way of working. And so having some sort of common language, I think, opens up all sorts of frontiers and barriers for us to communicate more and more globally. I have a question here, which I'm going to throw open. So any of you can volunteer to answer this. This is from Florencia Guzman. She is a preschool teacher of English at the British school in Punta Arenas. They're doing their best to improve the level of English of their students, trying to have more hours of exposure to the language. But it would be interesting to know which are the correct steps for becoming a bilingual school, considering what this enormous change could mean for the children and the families in Punta Arenas. I don't know if anyone would like to pick that up. Okay.
Well, I'll take it. I'm not sure what she means by the steps to follow to become a bilingual school, but clearly one of the biggest issues is determining whether you have a pool of appropriate teachers to select from in terms of hiring, right? So Gonzalo was talking about that a few minutes ago, that hiring good teachers is one of the most important elements. So if you don't have quality teachers, it might be better to hold off and maybe have an English intensive program. You can do a lot with English intensive. A school doesn't necessarily have to be bilingual to have good or decent outcomes in terms of English. There's a lot you can do by simply increasing the number of hours of English that you have in a week. So I would say that is important. And there are also, one of the things that's important to consider is often we think of in bilingual schools, we think the definition of a bilingual school has to be 100% in English. And most bilingual schools are not 100% in English. You have hours of sort of Castellano, Spanish. There are often other courses that are taught in Spanish, art, religion, or philosophy, music. So some of the sort of non-core courses or subjects you might think of that are often not taught in English because they don't have specialist teachers that can teach those. But really an immersion program is anywhere from 50% to 100% taught in English. And so if you can't offer, if you want to move, you might try moving towards an English intensive. And then after that, you might try maybe 50% in English and see how that goes. But I think the important thing is to make a decision that's responsible for the school and that allows you to provide the type of education that you say you're providing. So I think it's important for schools not to jump into a situation where they want to provide a certain type of education, but they don't really have the teachers there to provide it.
Okay, thank you, Annjeanette. I don't know if Mauricio or Gonzalo, you want to add to that answer? You want to come in?
Yeah, I would like to add some. Well, it's not adding something, but it's reinforcing what Annjeanette said, because we can have like English reinforced in schools, but it's very hard when we say that we're going as a school bilingual, right? Because it's the Chilean syllabus is not ready for creating a bilingual student, right? Because we need to think of the type of student we need to develop. So if we want to form a student that is fully connected with different issues from around the world, yeah, through another language or through another languages, yeah, it's different that having a student who is going to be very proficient enough to develop a conversation in English with another person through any media. But yeah, it's very important what Annjeanette said again, because it has to do with your proyecto educativo institucional, right? If the vision there is not clear on how this student is going to be bilingual, then you need to refocus on what you want to provide students in terms of learning another language. Because when you offer a bilingual program, you need to have certain characteristics. Yeah. As I said before, and as Mauricio said before, that there are some qualities that a teacher, thus a student, should have in order to be really bilingual.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gonzalo. Mauricio.
Just a brief comment. I think Annjeanette and Gonzalo are very right in saying that, okay, Annjeanette said earlier, yeah, you can transition perhaps into becoming or into introducing an intensive English program with, of course, the ensuing challenges that entails. And then once you believe that have teaching staff that can create the opportunities for you to become a fully bilingual school, you can do so. And the percentages of coverage and what have you. What I want to say is that, yeah, that's one important thing. Coverage is one thing. And it's already been hinted throughout our observations, but what goes on in the classroom is most important. So it is one thing how much English the students are exposed to, and it is quite another thing the type of exposure. And I think that's what Annjeanette said earlier, or referred to as quality of exposure. And it's not only quality of exposure in terms of, as Annjeanette said, in terms of proper English, whatever that is. No, it's in terms of how the English learning environment is structured in order to actually facilitate language learning. For example, how much interaction is fostered in the English language classroom. Now, it has been found that there is an awful lot of literature out there, empirical studies that have suggested that sometimes the models that these schools adopt, say CLIL, CBLT, CBI, or whatever form or variation of these approaches, they often entail, sometimes and wrongly, a sort of lecture type. So it is the teacher teaching the content, and teachers have cognitions with them. They bring their own baggage with them when they walk into the classroom. So if they believe the students have to learn biology and English is going to be used in very utilitarian forms, I'm sure the teacher is going to go all the way with the biology, and we'll probably forget about fostering interaction, providing corrected feedback that suits different types of learners. So the point I'm making is, it is one thing to talk about the coverage, and I think it is very right. And it is quite another thing to see what goes on in the actual classroom.
Okay, thank you, Mauricio. I think we've answered that. I think we've answered that question comprehensively. We have 5 minutes left, and now we have lots and lots and lots of questions, which is wonderful, and we don't have time to take them all. I also need a little bit of time to sum up. I think there is one here from Marvin Mansueto, and I'll ask all three of you just to make a very quick comment on this because of time left. But to all the panel of experts, during this pandemic, classroom strategies and pedagogies have changed. What advice would you give to all English teachers that we could use to ensure that our bilingual learners are all learning? Quick answers, please.
I mean, I think I'd like to pick up on Mauricio's point that what happens in the classroom. So looking at interaction is one of the most important things when you're thinking of language learning. So I think even in an online environment, or even to some extent, teachers who maybe don't have the possibility of having online classes and are providing sort of study guides for students, there's a way of making those more interactive than sort of passive or just simply looking at grammar rules. So I think providing as much interaction even in an online environment is one of the best strategies for ensuring learning.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Gonzalo?
I would like to say that you need to involve parents too in the practice of English in their houses, in their homes, because for example, nowadays we have 3 hours of English a week, yeah, plus the hours of the other subjects too. But in terms of grammar acquisition, etc., it's and the practice and the interaction, it's very important that parents are also committed to this goal, because most of the education nowadays is based on what parents can do at home with their kids. And another thing, I would like to reinforce what Annjeanette said, that to provide them with many opportunities of interaction, use the chat room, probably set small groups in order to have a conversation, to set a question at the beginning, and then have the class just talking about it, yeah, and force them to speak English in the class and to communicate, even if it's by email or even if it's in the chat room, etc.
Okay, thank you, Gonzalo. Mauricio, you had the first word, and I think you're going to have the last word. So we have 2 minutes left, so very quickly, if you just want to add to that, thank you.
Okay, plan activities so that learners can transition from knowing about the language to using the language, distributing practice evenly over time, and then we will be able to see automatization. Things are going to start flowing. Do provide corrective feedback. Do foster interaction, as Gonzalo was saying earlier. Breakout rooms are great, and you can certainly foster interaction in breakout rooms. And of course, there is so much to it. And one last thing, do draw students' attention to notice. So judiciously, instances of focus and forms as well within a more communicative context will be of much benefit to students. In other words, as Schmidt said in 1997, you don't learn anything until you have noticed it. Paying attention to those bits of language will be in the benefit of the learner and the language learning process.
I think that's an excellent way to finish. I don't have time to summarize. There is so much information there. I just think clearly we have a shortage of English language teachers. Clearly just being able to speak English is not sufficient to be able to teach English. And it also seems to me that there's a lot of help and great professional advice to be had in this congress that we're having, this conference that we're having right now. So thank you very much to our panelists. Annjeanette, Martin, thank you very much for your contribution. Mauricio, Veliz, thank you very much for your contribution. And to
Thank you very much.
Gonzalo, Eyzaguirre, muchas gracias a todos. I'm just going to go on very briefly and remind everybody that day 2, there is a day 2 tomorrow. And day 2 starts at 9 o'clock with an event called Walk with the Teacher, Guide the Way, Milestones on the Path to Leadership. At 10:20, there is, that is being led by Viviana Miglino. At 10:20, there is a session on experiences and reflections on different models in bilingual education, being led by Mike Spooner. And there is a third panel of experts, questions and answers at 11:40. So encourage you to come back tomorrow and get lots more of valuable information. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you to so many people who have given up some time on a Friday afternoon to be part of this conference. I'm sure it was worth it. It was really informative. I thoroughly enjoyed it personally. So thanks as well to the organisers of our first conference on bilingual education. Thank you and good afternoon. Bye-bye.